yeah, now let's talk about the midfield and how that all panned out this season. It's always pretty competitive, but not where you'd like the action to be. You'd like it to be at the front of the field for the championship, but for what it was, again, another really close battle. Fourth in the constructors went to Force India, of course. They, I guess, a class above the rest, again, punching above their weight with the low budget that they have to deal with. But, they had two strong drivers this year. I guess losing Nico Hulkenberg over the off-season to Renault was sort of nullified by the arrival of Esteban Ocon, and even though they had no podiums this year, two warring drivers in Ocon and Sergio Perez delivered some pretty good results, and a lot of them double points finishes. They finished either fourth or fifth a couple of times as well, so it's been a strong year for Force India in a year that has been, I guess, somewhat tarnished, you could say, by their off-track issues, again, regarding ownership, and we know next year that there'll be changing names, or at least trying to change the names to get the India part out of there. So how do we look at Force India season? A step up on last year. Well, 2 years in a row they've finished fourth now. So
I guess in one sense, the fact that they missed their podium for the first time since 2013, that's probably a bit of a benchmark that they'll be disappointed not to have achieved. But maintaining fourth's no mean feat, second season in a row ahead of the Williams and Renaults there, and even Toro Rosso looked strong really until that last quarter. So they've clearly punched above their weight the past few years. But it will be fascinating if they can maintain that next year when those teams really are, particularly Renault. I think we've got some pretty high hopes from them to move forward, and McLaren there with Renault, we expect them to be in that fight with Red Bull. So fourth's going to be a hot commodity in 2018, and I guess it's always a good thing when you've got two drivers who are passionate, and I think Perez, someone who's got fairly high stock, he was a bit affronted by just the, not so much aggressiveness of Ocon, but just the assuredness that he displayed. He looks like a man in a hurry to go places, and Perez is someone probably the next 12 months will be a bit of a crossroads. I know coming into 2017, I wrote a piece about it being make or break, but now 2018, certainly it's the one where if he's upstaged by his younger teammate, then he might be consigned to the midfield for the balance of his career in Formula One.
Well, you're the one who said, you placed a lot of criticism on him anyway regarding his attitude and everything, how he's so bullish about his prospects and everything, whereas, Ocon's a bit more... I guess, it feels as if, you felt as if Perez feels somewhat, emasculated by Ocon's, presence there. The fact that Perez was head honcho in a way because he was scoring the podiums for Force India even when Nico Hulkenberg was there. But now with Hulkenberg gone and Ocon's there, a bit more, I guess, a bit youthful and trying to make his way into the sport, Perez seems a little threatened.
Yeah, he just felt like he was under siege a bit. It was his camp, I guess, with Ocon being first year there in from Manor, and that tie that he has probably 2019, you could put him in that bracket to be a contender for the Mercedes seat if it doesn't work out with Bottas, or dare we say Lewis Hamilton decides he's had enough. He's certainly doing all the right things, the young Frenchman there, and Perez will be very envious if Ocon gets a jump on him.
That would be probably the case, yeah, considering Perez. But Perez, of course, still has all the backing that he needs financially as well. So whether he gets moved up in the world in Formula One, he will have financial backing, which, goes a long way, it seems, still these days. But, on talent, Ocon seems to be the guy who, young driver, up and coming, and you got to have him to be chance of beating someone like Verstappen in the future, or when Charles Leclerc moves over to Ferrari, if he does, now that he's coming in with Sauber next year. So we'll wait and see anyway regarding that. But Williams behind him, in the championship, Force India that is, and you could say that they were a bit dwarfed this year again. They've had an up and down season, especially for Lance Stroll, the rookie. The podium, I guess, in Baku, the highlight. He had the front row start, of course, in Monza, I think it was, where there was some penalties that promoted him, and then, of course, the scoring his first points at home in Canada too. So he's had an up and down season. I guess the results, next year.
Your term that you've used fairly frequently, feast or famine.
Well, it has been that way, I guess. The fact that whenever he scores points, he scores a lot of them, and then whenever he doesn't, he just is pretty much, left to starve. And Mexico was another example of that, where he was running up in the top 3 or top 4 again, and then he ended up finishing 6th, I believe. So his best result, I guess, in the back half of the season. But yeah, it was always hard this year. We didn't expect Stroll to immediately deliver results, and I guess a lot of it too has to do with Williams, where they're at the moment. They're sort of in limbo as far as where they were a few years ago, where when we came into 2014, they were so strong. They finished 3rd in the Constructors that year, but then since then they've sort of been in freefall with all these other teams catching up finally, and whether next year they'll be able to improve again, who knows? But we don't know yet who their next driver would be, with Felipe Massa announcing his retirement. And even for Massa this year, it hasn't been one of his best seasons, you could say. He's, I guess, probably wasn't mentally prepared, considering he was ready for retirement at the end of last year, and then having been called late into the piece to come drive this year. He hasn't really impressed or unimpressed. He's just been anonymous. That's probably the way I could sum it up the best.
2017 was a real transitional campaign for Williams. Lance Stroll, I guess his development curve, initially, think of Monaco when he was pleading for help. He certainly turned that around, and got to take your hat off to him, and he deserves that second campaign. But Felipe Massa, the circumstances there initially, I think he was pretty content to go on into 2017, but then when Stroll came knocking with his seemingly billions and billions of dollars from his father there, that was irresistible, and he gets that reprieve when Bottas ends up at Mercedes. And I guess just being even that month or so he might have lost just in that retirement state of mind, it might have been costly, and he really just marked time to a large degree this season. So it was nice to get that final retirement lap, and I guess do it on his terms, particularly when it came to races like Brazil. He got to probably airbrush out what happened 12 months earlier when he had that inglorious but emotional demise in the wet, and get some points and some good racing with his old adversary and friend in Fernando Alonso.
Yeah.
For what it was worth, obviously the stakes were a lot lower, but I think that was a nice way for him to sign off, and now it's in Williams' hands, whichever direction they take with 2018 and beyond.
Yeah, it is in their hands, really. And then, of course, it's just hard not to get caught up about Williams, considering the previous stature of this team. And they can be a force to be reckoned with, or they could just meander where they are at the moment. And when you talked earlier about, teams such as Renault perhaps coming through the Constructors' Championship and probably going to take it away from Force India next year, that's 4th, that is. What does that do for Williams if they can't improve? They're just going to continue to drop and drop. And then McLaren, and again, a dark horse for next year as far as how they're going to fare with Renault power. So could that mean Williams loses a couple more places? They've got that Mercedes engine on hand, of course, which is still quite significant. But on direct comparison with Force India, they both use the same engine. Force India, with the smaller budget, seems to have done the better job.
Yeah, they just get down to business, really. You can see that they're just efficient across the board. As much as they might have two real feisty drivers there, they're very humble about the way they conduct themselves. And for Williams, they want to get into gear quickly. If it is Cube, it's just on that commercial front, a bit of talk that Martini arrangement, the 5th season, is the conclusion of the current sponsorship package there, so they'll really want to have an improvement there, definitely not stagnate if they're going to have those dollars continue to be pumped in. And who knows about the the power side with, I think through 2020 they've got the commitment from Mercedes, but they'll want to still be top of their game. Otherwise, they'll be left to pick up the pieces with whoever is on the table, because we know with all these other teams, Mercedes remains the engine to have for anyone who's looking for a change of supplier.
That's right. Anyway, so let's move it on from Williams and Renault. We talked about them before. They beat Toro Rosso and Haas to 6th in the championship, with McLaren and Sauber just way behind. But, Renault, compared to where they were 12 months ago and then 24 months ago, it's pretty good progress what we've seen from them. And, it wasn't going to be easy to come back. The fact that when they came back to Enstone at the start of 2016, well, with the deal happening so late in the piece anyway, with them coming in January 2016, I believe it was, the transformation, the fact that they've got the factory back up and refurbished, and the fact that the development is going well, and we've seen that this year, the difference between last year and this year, the points that they were able to score. So last year they finished 8th in the Constructors' Championship, and now jumped 2 places into 6th is a solid result. And Nico Hulkenberg, first year with Renault, he made the leap of faith from Force India, where he could have finished again, with Force India, who finished 4th in the Constructors. He could have guaranteed himself that, or take the challenge, go to Renault, and perhaps build something special. And the consistent force that he is, he finished in the top 10, of course, despite the last part of the year for him not really working out with all those retirements and reliability failures. But he really has proved that he's someone who's going to be on the podium soon.
By the end of the decade,
end of the decade. Let's give it that much of a time period anyway. So, and he's a great leader too. I mean, no driver just goes off and wins Le Mans in their first attempt and isn't something special. So, Hulkenberg is one of those guys that I guess we're going to see him bloom sooner than later in Formula One. But before we forget about it entirely, we almost did anyway, is the fact that, Renault started off the year with Jolyon Palmer. I mean, it's been a while since we've mentioned that name anyway, so I guess, the writing was on the wall for Jolyon coming into this year, perform or perish, and in the end, he had to perish as far, didn't even see out the entire season.
Shedding a tear thinking about his demise.
Well, he couldn't, a lot of it, sure, it was bad luck in his favour, but then again, he couldn't perform on the days where Hulkenberg was able to get top 10 results, qualify in Q3, and, what excuses could we see cover that, I guess. So the fact that, it doesn't help that the fact that, since Carlos Sainz has come to Renault in this back part of the year, that he hasn't been able to deliver much results either for Renault. So, but then again, your future's a lot more promising with Sainz in the car than it is with Palmer.
Oh, just for Sainz, from that limited time he stepped in off the bat at Austin and delivered, and you can see that with the pre-season to acquaint himself with the factory and the car specifically suited to his needs, you can expect quite a bit, and he'll hold Hulkenberg to a greater account than did Palmer. So I think that really the expectations are there for them to pinch a sneaky podium in 2018, and 2019's a year when you can envisage, pretty much like it was their previous tenure in the sport in the 2000s, by that 4th season they're in the hunt for victories and then titles. Yeah,
you'd expect it to be like that, and with 2 drivers such as Sainz and Hulkenberg on hand, you wouldn't put it past them. But that could all change again. They could become a destination team for some of those marquee drivers. You're the one who danced with the thought of Fernando Alonso returning there next year or whatever, but turns out no, he's going to be staying put with McLaren. Whether it's long term or is it for the next year, we don't know. But after the 3, I guess, tumultuous years, it's finally happened, the McLaren Honda divorce, and looking forward to McLaren with Renault next year. And I guess there's not really much you could say about McLaren's year and Honda's year as just what hasn't already been said.
Pretty much insert 2015.
Yeah, the fact that they've gone backwards since last year, and poor Stoffel Vandoorne in his debut season immediately under pressure, and I guess, a lot of it which you prescribed, that he had to deliver on his own merit as well at some point and not rely on Honda to make good, and he did sort of improve in that second half of the season where He was a lot closer to Fernando Alonso. But then again, just the lack of power and lack of reliability does take away from, I guess, a season more than a driver's own failures.
They've just got to put a line through it. It's a real shame that they've been wiped out. Those final 2 or 3 seasons with Mercedes, they were quite negligible. That was partially their own fault and departed personnel who might have caused that pathway that they might have taken. See 2013 when they probably had the best chassis on the grid the previous season, and they managed to butcher that, and they've never really recovered from that point. So it's been 5 seasons in the wilderness, and who knows if they can be back to the heights of victories by the balance of this decade at least. But I think 2018 at least will just be about them getting some momentum back, and podiums would be a great bonus.
It would be as well, and you'd expect it if McLaren still claim that they've got one of the best chassis on the grid. So with that Renault power on board, could they be where Red Bull are this year as far as performance is concerned? So if that turns out to be the case, it would be mouth-watering for next year. But otherwise, I'm not going to make any bold predictions like I did 12 months ago with McLaren.
Are certain.
Though with Renault, it's there's a lot more confidence going into next year rather than what it was with Honda. So it's just a case of how they roll out of the truck in pre-season, whether they've had enough lead time for development and integrating this new power unit into their chassis. So there's a lot of questions, and we'll just have to wait and see come pre-season next year. Sauber as well. They've had, I guess we weren't expecting them to have such a great year anyway, but it's been pretty forgetful, but a lot of off-track stuff. So, another thing I almost forgot about as well coming into this end-of-year review, the fact that Manisha Kaltenborn parted ways with Sauber, which was a very sad moment for the team, considering she's taken the team through the dark times, I guess, the last few years that they've had. They've had 2 seasons where they've not scored points, I believe, 2014.
It was 1, and then that penultimate race, 2016, when Nasser picked
up
the points which cost him the drive, ultimately.
Well, yeah, but still, they've not really scored a whole lot of points lately, and then this year as well, it was Pascal Wehrlein who scored a couple of points for them earlier in the year, and where does he find himself anyway? So, yeah, difficult year for Sauber. They came in with that 2016 spec Ferrari power unit. We didn't expect them to really perform or develop, but yeah, Kaltenborn's gone. Then they announced that Honda would be their power supplier for next year. That then decided to not happen. Then they appoint Frederick Vasseur as their team principal, and then finally, at the end of the year, we get some clarity as to what's happening with Sauber in 2018. They're going to be given the title sponsorship from Alfa Romeo, and I guess just bringing him closer to Ferrari as far as alliance-wise is concerned. And I guess both from a team point of view and a political point of view, I think it's something that Ferrari will be really looking forward to.
Yeah, just having that greater autonomy to appraise the next generation as much as they've had that holding pattern. Really, as long as we can remember, Felipe Massa is the most recent example of someone who's come in really without too much experience. He went through that Sauber and Ferrari reserve program, but largely they've recruited from outside, and I think Charles Leclerc probably expect 2 seasons for him at Sauber, and by 2020 he'll be right to go. And Antonio Giovinazzi was harsh to miss out this time around, but it means Marcus Ericsson there's really got to be right into it. He was pointless, so he's got to justify his retention in 2018. Otherwise, he might be replaced, as you were mentioning, off the air mid-season.
Yeah, imagine that if he was given the door mid-season or before then, as we saw with Danny Kvyat again this year. Just quickly going back to Toro Rosso, and I guess Toro Rosso didn't finish the year with the same driver lineup that they started with Sainz, of course, going off to Renault, then Kvyat being turfed in favour of Pierre Gasly, and then of course we have Brendan Hartley joining us from Porsche as well, going into next year too. So really, it was unfortunate unfortunate those last few races not being able to see them perform as well as they would have liked to have with the reliability issues that they had on the Renault side. But for Toro Rosso next year, Honda engine, it's going to be an interesting one. But they've got two drivers that should be quite solid for them in Hartley and Gasly.
Yeah, they get a chance, and Hartley got a bit of a raw deal, but hats off to his commitment, those 7 consecutive weekends on the bounce in WEC or F1, and he's done it the hard way from his time in the academy in the early 2010s, and Pierre Gasly as well comes highly regarded. So across the board with Leclerc, you see it Sauber, Kubica's likely return, and you just see that a lot of these talents there, if they've been given the right package, then we could be in for a real transitional time where the next generation can finally blossom, since we have seen really Jenson Button, Massa, who knows, another 12 months, Kimi Räikkönen and Fernando Alonso might be gone. So it will be nice just to see these guys that are worthy of that chance making the most of their opportunities.
Could be. Quickly, just on Haas as well, the season that they've had, second season for them in Formula One, and they've ended up scoring more points, of course, than last year, courtesy of having 2 drivers that could actually score points.
They only had one driver in 2016.
Well, essentially, yes, because what did Esteban Gutierrez do for them? Not much. So the fact that, Kevin Magnussen given a second chance, or another chance in F1 after being kicked out of Renault last year, he scored points, but just consistency, I guess, has been the problem for Haas, and Roman Grosjean's a testament to that.
Yeah, well, I think only one race where there was a dual scoring, and otherwise it was very hit or miss, and it seemed in that back half of the season that Grosjean lost his way and was more synonymous. I don't know if it was Liberty's fault for increasing the publicity of those drivers' briefings, but he was always seen having a whinge, where Kevin Magnussen was often getting into wars with other drivers or pulling off some really punching above his weight performances, such as Mexico.
Or being pretty, just comments-wise as well,
exactly.
yes.
That's what I'm alluding to with Hulkenberg.
I thought, just on track you were talking about, not off track.
Involved, getting his rolling his sleeves up now. He's got that really, meaty appearance that he's bulked up since his McLaren days with the tattoos. And he
ain't letting anyone mess with him, that's for sure. So, he's a self-confessed loner as well in the F1 paddock, which is kind of sad. I'll be your friend, Kevin. It's all good. We could hang out together.
We need to talk about Kevin.
We need to talk about Kevin. Yeah, I'll be happy to hang out with you anytime. So, anyway, what do we expect from them next year as well? Third season, Roman Grosjean, I guess, perhaps also one of those drivers on the precipice as far as his future in F1 is concerned. He hasn't really been able to stand out so much at Haas, apart from those opening races last year where he was like 5th and 6th or whatever. But does he want to move up? Do you see him as a driver who moves up next year, or will he end up just spending his career in the midfield?
I think he had those designs on the Ferrari seat when he made that switch to Haas, but the weakening of those ties now, the Sauber probably recommitting to Ferrari more so than it had been after the BMW era. He's probably missed the boat. We can see Leclerc there next in line. So for Grosjean, who knows, maybe he's got some idea of getting back in with Renault, since we know he did discuss he'd like to return there when he departed following 2015. But beyond that, he's got a lot to fight for next season, and maybe if not for Sauber, it'll be Giovinazzi and Haas in 2019.
Yeah, that could be a possibility too. I almost said that he could have been in the car next year, Giovinazzi, if Haas had enough of Grosjean's complaining, which has been one of the tropes, I guess, of the year in F1 in general. But so that's about it for the midfield, and we'll be back, I guess, with some more.